worship with us. First, second, third, and five. Welcome each other if you would.
We'll get started this evening by taking your prayer concerns for the bulletin for next. While you're turning to Genesis 49, I'm going to read to you the text that Cooper sent to us after watching this morning's service, namely the children's sermon and the use of knives. He sent what would be the headline, if anybody got a hold of today's video: "Grown Man with Knife Lectures Children on His Religious Text." He better be glad that his mama likes him. So, but yeah, that's what Cooper sent us today. So, anyway, and if any parents do have issues with their kids wanting to play with knives, I will try to help with the counseling. No names or anything, but Kate Frederick would be one I'd be willing to talk to. So tonight we are in Genesis chapter 49, and we're going to be looking at the blessing that Jacob gives to his sons. And so there's a lot of moving parts tonight with the text, and so we're going to get right into it. You know, as far as the biblical timeline goes, this chapter follows right on the heels. No real time has changed from chapter 48, and so we are in around the year 1639 BC, and so we're going to start looking at verses 1 and 2. And what we find here is that Jacob gathers his sons together for this blessing. So let's look at verses 1 and 2 in Genesis chapter 49. It says, "Then Jacob called his sons and said, 'Gather around, and I will tell you what will happen to you in the days to come. Come together and listen, sons of Jacob. Listen to your father Israel.'" So directly following Jacob's blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh, Jacob pulls together all of his sons, and he's got a message for each of them. And the message is part blessing, it's part prophecy, and it's really, in some cases, just an exposure of their personality as to, you know, the types of men or the types of tribes that they would turn out to be. And so what we find is that Jacob just shares very candidly with his sons, as you know, he realizes that he is about to die, and he wants to bless them or share with them one final time. So look at verses 3 and 4, and we're going to see Reuben's blessing. It says, beginning in verse 3 there, "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my strength, and the first fruits of my virility, excelling in prominence, excelling in power. Turbulent as waters, you will not excel, because you got into your father's bed and you defiled it. He got into my bed." So Reuben, as the firstborn of Jacob's sons, he should have received a lot more than his brothers. He should have received a special blessing. He should have received a position of leadership. He should have received a position of priesthood. He would have, in this time, he would have actually been the family priest, according to the way things had been going. He would have also received a double portion of the inheritance, the birthright, so to speak. And so, due to his immoral act with Jacob's concubine Bilhah that we read about back in Genesis 35, and that was 41 years, give or take, before what we're reading in the text tonight. And because of that action, he lost it all. And so he lost all of those blessings, all of those things. Throughout the Old Testament, well, I mean, the way that we know this, that he lost all of these things, not only because of Jacob's words, but the leadership position went to Judah. The priesthood went to Levi, and the double portion of the inheritance went to Joseph. And so throughout the Old Testament, we find out a few more things about Reuben that sort of play into what Jacob's real blessing is there, that Reuben would not excel, that his family would not excel. First off, in Judges chapter 5, we find that Reuben, or the tribe of Reuben, really struggled with indecision on, you know, how to advance and how to do things. Also, they didn't enter the promised land, and instead lived on the eastern side of the Jordan. So you see the tribe of Reuben was still on the eastern side of the Jordan and didn't even go into the promised land. And then lastly, as Jacob put it, you know, the tribe did not excel because, you know, as one writer puts it, no significant judge, king, or prophet ever came from this tribe. So really, Reuben's actions had a ripple effect into his tribe for generations. Now we see in verses 5 through 7, Simeon and Levi's blessings. Look at verses 5 through 7. It says, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their knives are vicious weapons. May I never enter their council. May I never join their assembly. For in their anger they kill men, and on a whim they hamstring oxen. Their anger is cursed, and for it is strong, and their fury, for it is cruel. I will disperse them throughout Jacob and scatter them throughout Israel. So, because of Simeon and Levi's turbulent history at Shechem, where they slaughtered the men of Shechem back in Genesis 34:25, Jacob's blessing for both of them was basically identical. They were basically one in the same. He stated that they would be scattered throughout Israel. And one thing that I read this week made an interesting theory about why this blessing was done, or the reason God went in this direction with them. And the reason was because as vicious as Simeon and Levi were as individuals, if their tribe had grown in that vicious nature had continued in them, then imagine a tribe of vicious people in the middle of the rest of, really in the rest of Israel, that, if there's these two separate tribes that were very vicious, and it was just part of their personality, part of the way that they did business, then it could have been a real threat to the other 10 tribes. And so that's a valid concern, or a valid point that could possibly be the case. But what we know is that Levi and Simeon both were scattered throughout Israel. We know that Levi was scattered as the priestly tribe, and so they went to the priestly cities, and they were scattered throughout to be the really the priest in Israel to help lead the people in worship. And Simeon, if you see it there, they were scattered throughout cities in Judah only. They didn't even have like tribal land. They had cities they only had cities that they were that they had available to them. And so they really were scattered throughout Israel. Now, look on into verses 8 through 12, and this is one of the longer blessings, and this is the blessing of Judah. It says, Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the necks of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. Judah is a young lion, my son. You return from the kill. He crouches. He lies down like a lion or a lioness. Who dares to rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, or the staff from between his feet, until he whose right it is comes, and the obedience of the peoples belongs to him. He ties his donkey to a vine, and the colt of his donkey to the choice vine. He washes his clothes in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. So, Judah is no different than his brother Reuben in the fact that he had his own issues and indiscretions. And he had a particular issue with Tamar 20 years earlier, as we read about in Genesis 43. But he seems to have turned his life around. We get the feeling from Reuben's blessing that he didn't necessarily repent. He didn't necessarily change his ways and do anything like that. But it seems that Judah not only repented, but he returned to the family and worshiped with the family, and even ended up with a position of leadership in the family, as we saw when dealing with Joseph before they knew that Joseph was Joseph. And so Jacob here blesses Judah and makes his tribe the royal tribe, that through him royalty would come. Meaning kings like David and Solomon, and even the Messiah would come from the line of Judah. Now, the phrase in verse 10, if you see there in verse 10, it says, the scepter will not depart from Judah. Some people think that means that there would always be a king in Israel that would always be there, throughout all of Israel's history. But something I read this week, and said that really what that meant was that that Judah's tribe would always have the right to rule over Israel, not a continuous reign that would be completely uninterrupted. And we even know that to be the case because until 1948, Israel wasn't a nation for basically 1900 years, or close to it. And so really what we see too, though, is at the end of this blessing for Judah, we see prophecies about the Messiah. We see that the Messiah would come through the line of Judah because everything from the second half of verse 10 to verse 12 is a prophecy of what the situation would be like once the Messiah was here and once he rules. So we understand that this is about the return of Christ. And it even references there in verse 12, those references refer to the strength and the power of the Messiah. And so we see that there's a lot of royalty that will come from them, but also we see that the Messiah would come and what impact he would have as well. So look on with me at verses 13 through 18. This is where we see three of the sons' blessings, Zebulun, Issachar, and Dan's blessings. It says beginning in verse 13, Zebulun will live by the seashore and will be a harbor for ships, and his territory will be next to Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey lying down between the saddlebags. He saw that his resting place was good and that the land was pleasant. So he leaned his shoulder to bear a load and became a forced laborer. Dan will judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan will be a snake by the road, a viper beside the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider falls backward. I wait for your salvation, Lord. So right here, we see three different blessings. The first one is Zebulun's, and his blessing had more to do with his tribal allotment than his character or his personality. His tribal land would be landlocked. You see it there that Zebulun is landlocked by Asher and technically Manasseh, to where he doesn't actually have access to the Mediterranean Sea, but he's only about 10 miles away. So access to the Mediterranean Sea really wasn't that far away for them, for that particular tribe. But his land was also close to places like Sidon and Tyre, which Tyre is right there, and Sidon is up just a little bit from there, which were the Phoenician lands and the Phoenician cities. And what that would do is that would give them access to really all of the Mediterranean, because of the way the Phoenicians were seafaring people and were trading widely along the Mediterranean. And so not only did Zebulun get his blessing, but so did Issachar here. And his blessing was much like Zebulun's, that it had more to do with his tribal allotment than it really was who he was as a person. And so Issachar's tribal land would be situated, as it says there, sort of like a donkey lying down between two saddlebags. And what that means is that in this region right here, what Issachar is in that dark green, that east to west of Issachar's tribal allotment, what it's doing is it sits between the Galilean hills right here and the land of Manasseh right here, which had hills in it as well. So basically, Issachar's tribal allotments sit in a valley almost, if you want to look at it that way, with two sets of mountains to the north and to the south. And so the interesting thing is that Issachar was never, until the 10 northern tribes are taken into captivity, which really wasn't slavery. We read in Issachar's blessing that they would be a forced laborer. And one of the commentaries I read this week said that it wasn't so much that he would be forced into slavery as it was that his tribe would embrace their agricultural land right there that was very fertile ground. And so that's really that they would not, I don't want to say forced to labor, but they would choose to labor. And that was what is referenced there. But then you also had Dan's blessing. And this has more to do with a prophecy of how his descendants would turn out than about his tribal lands. Because one of the only judge that came from the land or the tribe of Dan is who? Does anybody know? You better be getting ready for the trivia Bible study coming up soon. It was Samson. Samson was the only judge from the tribe of Dan, but he would bring justice. He would judge Israel. Also, following Samson's time as judge over Israel, the tribe of Dan would lead Israel into idolatry. So this one tribe, the tribe of Dan right here, would lead the entire nation of Israel into idolatry. And that's why Jacob uses this symbolism of the viper and the snake. And his cry there that you see as the text on the screen there, talking about, I wait for your salvation, Lord, must have been, according to one commentary, I guess you would say a cry to the Lord, because he understood how Dan would lead his Jacob's descendants, into idolatry and what that would look like. And so in this moment of prophecy, much like we see with the prophet Daniel, Jacob sees, or knows, or, God shares with him what is going to happen to all of his descendants because of Dan. And it's really a cry to God, I wait for your salvation, Lord. I'm waiting for you to rescue these descendants of mine from this one part of the family. And so if you look on into verses 19 through 21, this is where we see the three shortest blessings, and it's the blessings of Gad, Asher, and Naphtali. So look at verses 19 through 21. It said, Gad will be attacked by raiders, but he will attack their hills. Asher's food will be rich, and he will produce royal delicacies. Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. So, each of these sons, these are the three that probably felt like, gee, Dad's, got really good things to say about all the, some of the other brothers, but we just get one sentence, But really, it's a short blessing for each of these sons. Gad's blessing speaks to what his tribe would face because of their choice of tribal lands. You see where Gad is, it's the brown one here that's sort of right through there. That particular tribe would stay on the eastern side of the Jordan River, and we see that in Joshua chapter 13. But that area, really that side of the Jordan down through there, it at least to the northern end of the Dead Sea, not the Red Sea, but the Dead Sea right here. I had a church member today after church text me and said, we made a generous donation to purchase this book for you to help you with your geography, and it's a Bible maps book. And I said, geography is not my problem. I just don't know how to talk. And but they said, we're just picking it. We didn't buy it for you. But I might have needed it. I don't know. But those trade routes that would come down on the eastern side of the Jordan River would eventually end up in Jerusalem and then lead down towards Egypt. But because of that, the tribe of Gad, and really East Manasseh, but really Gad would be in harm's way because of raiders and thieves because of those trade routes. And so Gad would become really adept at defending themselves and really counterattacking these raiders and their enemies who would come because of their trade routes that came through there. Now, Asher's blessings, and Asher is up here on the seashore. What we see is that his blessing has to do with his tribe's future prosperity. And I'm sure that part of that had to do with the fact that Sidon and Tyre were up here and that they would be able to trade and things like that. That the land occupied by Asher would be fertile and it would receive plenty of rain, not just because they're on the coast, but just because of the location geographically where they're at. And so they would have access to those Phoenician ports just north of them, and that would allow them to get goods from all over the Mediterranean. And so Asher's tribe, as it says there, the food would be rich and they would produce royal delicacies, implying that they are going to have very fertile land and that they would be very prosperous. But then the last one we see there in verse 21 was Naphtali's blessing. And it has to do with how that particular tribe would live in their tribal allotment in the Promised Land. And Naphtali is in this region right here, sort of not necessarily so much west, but north and west of the Sea of Galilee. And so their land would be a very rugged land. It's basically if you remember the prophecy, I think it's in Matthew, that talks about the Messiah, that he would come from it's a messianic prophecy that speaks about the land of the Messiah, but it doesn't say so specifically that the Messiah would come from there. It's sort of an odd prophecy, but it says Zebulun, the land of Zebulun and Naphtali, and it's talking about, well, that's because Zebulun and Naphtali were the region of Galilee. I mean, that's where Galilee actually is, and we know that Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and that sort of thing. But nevertheless, that land is a very rugged land. It's a very fertile land. They get a lot of rain like some of the other parts do. But it's kind of interesting that Jesus was actually a carpenter and didn't end up as a farmer or something along those lines. But it also helps us to understand why Jesus, although this time in history when Jesus was alive was a very agricultural, a very agricultural time in the history of Israel, especially for the people. They agriculture was something that they just knew and they lived it. But it shows you that because of the region that Jesus lived in, he had a very agricultural background and could very easily share parables like the sower and the lost sheep and others that would really help drive the point home so that the people he was teaching would understand that. And so one writer puts it this way, talking about Naphtali's blessing. It says, apparently this tribe would exhibit a freedom and beauty that would be different from the other tribes. And so according to, a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. And so it's talking, about Naphtali and about their region as well. Verses 22 through 26 give us the blessing of Joseph. And this is, if you remember, we already had a blessing for him back in chapter 48. Now he gets another blessing in chapter 49. So let's look at verses 22 through 26. And Joseph, like Judah, ends up with another lengthy blessing. It says, Joseph is a fruitful vine beside a spring. Its branches climb over the wall. The archers attacked him, shot at him, and were hostile towards him. Yet his bow remained steady, and his strong arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, by the name of the shepherd, the rock of Israel, by the God of your father who helps you, and by the Almighty who blesses you with blessings of the heavens above, blessings of the deep that lies below, and blessings of the breast and the womb. The blessings of your father excel the blessings of my ancestors and the bounty of the ancient hills. May they rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince of his brothers. So, Joseph gets this just, wonderfully worded blessing from his father. And, you start reading those first two verses, maybe the first two and a half verses. And it sounds like Jacob is talking about what Joseph's brothers did to him, in symbolism and being attacked and, all of this, and how God blessed him despite that. And that's one way of looking at it. But Joseph and his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, they had already received their blessings from Jacob back in Genesis 48. And here Jacob blesses, Joseph again. And, really the future of Joseph is tied up in Ephraim and Manasseh, because you see in all of this, there's no tribal land allotted to Joseph. There just isn't, because after Ephraim and Manasseh are adopted by Jacob, Joseph really, he falls out as a tribe, yet Manasseh and Ephraim fill the spot of Joseph and Levi, because in the tribal allotments and things like that. And so, but we see that Manasseh ended up with land east of the Jordan and west of the Jordan, and Ephraim was centrally located in what comes to be known as the region of Samaria. And so eventually they would struggle. Ephraim would end up struggling with Judah over the leadership of Israel. But in addition to that, what we see is that, if you remember, Jacob said that Ephraim would be a very prosperous tribe, and that they would be very powerful. And they were prosperous, because the land that they have there in Samaria, it gets very good rainfall, which helped them with their fertile land. Now, a lot of the land of Israel is fertile, but there are some very arid, very dry places as well, especially at times to the east of the Jordan. But nevertheless, what we do know is that one of the most famous leader to come from Ephraim was, you gotta get ready, it's coming. Quiz time trivia is coming. It was Joshua. And so, Joshua is the first leader of Israel inside the promised land after Moses. And so Ephraim is powerful, and, is even leading Israel into the promised land at one point. Now, as for Joseph's future through Manasseh, they would, as you see there, they would be a physically divided tribe with land on both sides, but they had fertile land that received a lot of rain as well. But despite covering more, more than double the land of Ephraim, Jacob's prophecy in chapter 48 shows us that, it shows us that, we see that it comes to fruition that despite having, way more land than Ephraim, Manasseh does not become the powerhouse that Ephraim would. And so, Jacob's prophecy is pretty spot on there. And so the last one that we see, the last blessing, is Benjamin's. And this is in verses 27 through 28. So look with me at verses 27 and 28. It says, Benjamin is a wolf. He tears his prey. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the plunder. These are the tribes of Israel, 12 in all, and this is what their father said to them. He blessed them, and he blessed each one with a suitable blessing. So Benjamin's blessing is, just one statement. Just one statement, and then it closes out, or Moses closes out the blessings of the tribes. And see, Benjamin's blessing is another one of those that is really a prophecy of future tribal events. Because during the time of the Judges, in Judges chapter 20, the tribe of Benjamin which is located just above, right there on the, right there at Jerusalem, and really central to most of the nation of Israel. What we find is that in Judges chapter 20, that the other 11 tribes, they actually attack and almost wipe out Benjamin. Even to the point, if I remember right, where they are actually sending they're sort of bartering for wives and trying to keep Benjamin from being completely wiped out after those 11 tribes attack them. Now, the attack on Benjamin came about because of the protection by Benjamin of an immoral group living inside of their tribe. And so it wasn't that it was unwarranted or just unnecessary, I guess, but that's why the other 11 tribes come and attack Benjamin, almost wiping them out as a complete tribe. But despite this, a Benjaminite becomes the first king of Israel, and that is Saul. Good job. So, okay, you're ready for the next study. But so we see that this is, that Benjamin, despite their failures at this one time, they are the tribe that produces the first king in Israel. So, although some of Jacob's sons received greater blessings than others, and some received prophecies of what the future held for their descendants, Moses correctly stated in verse 28 what he said there, wrapping up the blessings. It says, he blessed them, and he blessed each one with a suitable blessing. And some were suitable to their past and to their future and to the land that they would have. Now, we're closing out tonight looking at the lessons learned from Joseph, as we always have. And in chapter 49, the lesson we learn is that God's blessings can be a warning as much as a reward. I mean, we see that in these blessings, because the blessings that Jacob passed along to his sons, some of them were warnings of what would happen in the future if they didn't, change their ways. So of the 12 sons of Jacob, not counting Ephraim and Manasseh, 5 were given warnings of what would happen to their descendants. Almost half of the tribes are warned. Well, I guess if you take out Ephraim and Manasseh, it literally is half of the tribes are warned about what would happen down the line. Some would harbor immoral people like Benjamin. Some would pay the penalties for their past sins like Reuben and Levi and Simeon. And some would lead Israel into idolatry like Dan. And, these warnings came at a time when Jacob's sons had the opportunity to start setting things right for future generations. And what we find is that they just didn't do that. Things just were never made right. Reuben obviously, most likely, never repented. And then you have Levi and Simeon, who may not have ever repented of their actions as well. Benjamin had time to set his people right about harboring those immoral people and setting a solid example for them. And Dan had the same opportunity, but they just didn't. Then you have, of the 12 sons of Jacob, only 2, Judah and Joseph, received favorable blessings unrelated to their tribal lands. Because, the ones with the tribal lands, they were told how wonderful their land would be, and that would probably be something of an enticement that would encourage them during the 40 years of the wandering in the wilderness that, hey, we've got this wonderful land waiting for us. We just have to get there. And so, what we see, though, is that Judah and Joseph received these favorable blessings, and Judah was promised that the royal line would come through him, and it did. You had David and Solomon and even Jesus, the King of Kings. And then you have Joseph, he had his double portion of the inheritance, but his blessing in chapter 49 only speaks to his benefit. There's never anything that is necessarily unfriendly, I guess you would say, towards him. Now, of the 12 sons of Jacob, 5 of them, Zebulun, Issachar, Gad, Asher, and Naphtali, they received blessings describing their tribal allotment in the promised land. That's what they got. That was their blessing, was telling them really, the quality of the land, the promise of prosperity, and, referencing, obviously the abundance of rain that would help their fertile lands. So, we see the breakdown on these different blessings. But when we read Genesis 49, it's hard for us to quickly pick out a lesson that we can apply to our life based on this long list of blessings to these 12 men, 12 men and then their tribes from 3,600 years ago. It'd be, you're like, well, Pastor, are you grasping at straws? But the reality is that Jacob was not the one actually doing the blessing. And he wasn't the one providing the prophecy. Because we know and we understand that God was the one providing the blessings or withholding the blessings. And that God was the one who was the source of the prophecies in cases where the blessings may be withheld. So when it comes to the blessings that God gives to us, sometimes they are warnings based on our past actions, just like with Reuben and Levi and Simeon. Talking too fast. And sometimes they're a glimpse of what might not change or what could happen if things don't change. And so we see that with some of the others where, like Dan and Benjamin, and what could happen there. And I think that we would all agree as adults that if we had the opportunity to change our future based on a warning, it would be wise to do so, right? I mean, if we have a warning that something is going to happen in our life and things are going to happen, then we would see that as the real blessing, right? That we have the foreknowledge or the wisdom to make that change. And God sometimes warns us as a blessing to us, and it's just a matter of whether we heed that warning or not. Sort of like with Dan and Benjamin, they didn't do that. And other times, God blesses us with intangible things that we can't put a value on and we can't even hold in our hands. Kind words from friends at just the right time. A person who supports us during a difficult season of life. Or sometimes opportunities to grow as a person of faith. Those things are not tangible. We can't hold them. We can't really even put a value on them other than to say at times they're priceless for us. But we too often think of blessings as being related to our finances, our possessions, but sometimes those blessings from God, and I think we would all agree, those blessings can't be measured. They can't be held. And we don't always know what they are until after the fact. But other times, God does bless us with intangible ways that shows us His provision for us. There have been times over the years you hear people talk about how God stepped up. They were in need of financial help and at just the right time, God stepped up and blessed them in whatever way because they needed that help. And the help was obvious to have only come from God. But it came at just the right time. That is a blessing from God. And there's other times where we see God stepping up and providing for us in the way of blessings like that. But God's blessings will sometimes be things that will help us in a tangible way. And when He does this, we need to be sure to give Him the glory just as much as we do when it's an intangible thing. Or when it might be that warning that we heeded because we realized the direction that He had for us. And so that is the end of our study tonight in Genesis 49. And so are there any questions as we wrap up this evening? Any questions about the blessings of Jacob to his sons? I've struggled with that before. Is why in the world would would God choose one of His literally most vicious cutthroat sons. You know, play the devil's advocate here. Well, some of them ended up being Pharisees, potentially as well, not just in the priestly line. So, they were, pretty cutthroat at times. So, I know that's definitely not the first one that you would, pick to be. If you looked at all of Jacob's sons, Levi's definitely not the first one you would say, oh yeah, that guy's going to be the religious leader, especially after fooling the men of Shechem and then slaughtering them. Any other comments or thoughts tonight? All right. Well, just a look ahead. Wednesday, we're going to have a guest speaker because our family's going to be out of town on Wednesday. Rick Krause will be doing the study on Wednesday night. Next Sunday morning, Pastor Jacob will be preaching. And on Sunday night, Rick Krause will be doing the teaching on Sunday night as well. And so be sure to be here for those things in the week to come. And so we're leaving on Wednesday and get back. I'll be back in the office the following Wednesday. And so I hope that things go well for the next week. And I look forward to catching the messages online. And so with those things being shared, we'll close out with a prayer and we'll be dismissed. Father, we come to you tonight just grateful that we can study your word and see how you have not only blessed Israel, but also how you have warned them through Jacob's blessings. And so, Father, I pray that we would take to heart what you have shared with us through your word, and I pray that we would take it to heart and allow it to impact us. And so, Father, I pray that as we go forward from here, we pray that you would continue to bless our church, and we pray for your blessings on those that will be speaking in the next few services. And God, we just ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.